I cannot get the best value out of my AI because the data isn't talking to each other.
And that's going to really evolve how we actually even Google search.
Future is already here, but it's not evenly distributed.
Let's get started. Welcome to Grey Mattering Code, brought to you by the Business Technology Club at Schuller. Grey Mattering Code is a podcast and platform designed to spark open conversations with thought leaders across industries and market, people driving change and shaping what's next to the decisions they're making today. Today on the show, we're thrilled to be joined by Daniel DuPlessis. He's a principal architect for generative AI at Amazon Web Services. Daniel leads AWS's generative AI initiatives in Canada, working with organizations across industries to drive innovation, boost productivity, and reimagine business processes. With a background that spans 3 continents and sectors like telecom, retail, and finance, Daniel brings a rich cross-industry perspective to how AI can create real business impact. Welcome, Daniel. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having me.
Yes, it's a pleasure to have you. Maybe for our listeners, tell us a bit more about yourself and what you do in your current role at AWS.
Sure. So my career, I probably jumped around a bit more than most people. I started off as a chemical engineer. I did an accounting degree also on the side and an MBA as well. And after starting as a chemical engineer, I actually felt drawn more to the business side of things. So I went into sales, really enjoyed that very much. But I was missing that kind of thing, where I can innovate more. So that led me to going into IT technologies. I worked for software companies. And different industries, a lot of consulting, but ultimately that landed me around 2015. I realized that the world was changing, so I focused very much on AI as well as cloud, and that led me to Amazon Web Services, where I'm today. So today I'm leading the cross-functional initiatives for generative AI within Canada. So it includes things like go-to-market, helping customers on their AI maturity, and this is something I truly believe in, that I hope to help customers scale.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Super helpful context. Let's start big. How would you describe the current state of generative AI? Are we in the hype cycle, or are we seeing some real value emerge?
Yeah. So I have been involved with AI projects since around 2015, and I think there was the kind of projects that we did up to around 2023, and then the ones after. Now, earlier on, if you had a AI project that you wanted to do, the typical thing was you would actually go and define the problem. You would actually needed to collect data to train your model. So that often involved annotations. You need to classify that, and that data collection was a very long process. It took months, and then you would go and build the models. And sometimes, the algorithms would actually give you the results you want. And if they succeeded, you would go and deploy those solutions. I worked on a lot of kind of computer vision cases, and very often the cases was maybe on the line, the cameras were different, the lighting, and these things did not work. So the key point was, these projects took a long time. There was a lot of effort before you could actually see the results. What has happened with generative AI, it has really flipped all of that. So there was this influential paper published in 2015, around the transformer model. So that kick-started this whole revolution that we have now. So today, if you have an idea, you can just take one of those foundation models, and many of them are exposed through cloud interfaces, so you don't need to worry about hosting, training models, and you can actually just put some prompts in the model. You can test your idea and get some really quick results. So I think where we're now with generative AI, the ideation, the experimentation, and the implementation has really sped up. It has also opened up lots of use cases, and I'm sure we're going to talk about that.
Absolutely, yes. Very interesting take, especially how hype and real value can overlap, right? And just to build on that, what are some of the most exciting or meaningful moments that you've seen in generative AI over the last 1 year? It's the space is rapidly evolving, right? We've seen co-pilots to synthetic media. Curious to know if there's been a particular moment or a use case that really excited you the most.
Yeah. So I think what we have seen is that, there had been, around 2023, that's when everybody were starting to talk about generative AI. I think there had been some fundamental challenges. Initially, it was the hallucinations where, these models would provide things which were false. There were some challenges, if you want to get quality output out of these models, you need to provide it with data and context of your business. So getting that in place was really hard. Another thing is we've seen a lot of kind of these chatbots. So you interact with the chatbot, it gives you back information, but you also need to provide it a lot of context. And if you get an answer, you need to turn around and do something else in a different system. So and you have to direct every single step of that. What I've seen in the last 12 months or so is that the models have become really robust. You see much fewer hallucinations. The data access patterns, we are getting some standardization that's happening with that. So that makes it possible to infuse some of these, important data bits that you need to for processing. There's also something called tool use or function calling. So that is that your generative AI can decide, I want to do this web search, I want to call this CRM system, I want to access certain data. And it can actually make that kind of a decision making for you, as well as go and update certain systems. So we are going, what I've seen is we're going from these passive systems to these active systems that can actually take action on your behalf, better data access. And then there's also going to be, we see more cases around more autonomous agents, these kind of things that you don't need to tell them every step what they need to do. You can tell them what problem you want to solve, and they can go out and execute that. So I think that's, where I see the biggest impacts. One more actually is around code generation, updating software. So a big challenge across nearly all enterprises are their legacy applications. There was a study that was done that found 75% of developer time is just maintaining and running those legacy applications. So now we're actually having these tools that can help you refactor and modernize those applications. So those are the things, that really excites me.
Exactly. I think that's a great example, especially the way chatbots have transformed over the years. That's remarkable, right? And, just to build on that, what frameworks do you use when evaluating whether a generative AI use case is worth pursuing or not?
Yeah. So I'll give you maybe a little bit of a longer answer. Flag me if I'm going too deep. I've worked within multiple organizations, large organizations, and the typical process is that every year they allocate a certain budget for capital projects. And then, product managers or functional areas would come with their proposals, and they would actually build a business case based on ROI payback period. And you're competing with all of these projects, and if your project gets selected, your project is above the line. If it gets rejected, you're below the line. I think those fundamentals are still in place. However, what is different today is that there's just a sheer number of generative AI use cases. There are so many. So you'll see this bottoms up. Individual teams will identify this, like this long-standing problem. I can solve this with generative AI. So you have a bottoms up, many use cases. Then companies at the board level, the board is actually asking, what's CEO or C-level, what is your generative AI strategy? So you've got both top-down and bottoms-up. I think with all of that, I think some of the challenges are around, at scale, identifying what are the potential use cases, what are those areas where they can actually lean in. And there's a few areas that we do that. If you do that properly, you would have this kind of a matrix that, within an organization, all their use cases, you would actually quantify the impacts, identify the most impact funds, productivity, maybe some business cases that you optimize, as well as the risk and feasibility. And with that, I've done some work as well as our organization. Like we've got a cloud economics team that you can actually build frameworks that you can take a given use case, plug in certain numbers and assumptions, and you build your business case. I've done some work on industry data where we infuse, labor statistics. We look at, where's the cost within certain industries, and there's some really good work that was done at places like National Bureau of Economic Research in the US, where I look at certain job functions, the degree to which you can, augment that with AI. So you put all of that together, and you can have a point of view that for this industry, here's your 25 use cases. You can build a directional use case. So I'm doing a lot of work in those areas. So there's some frameworks. You can start with an individual use case, build your use case, or you can go top down and identify the sweet spots. I know that was a bit of a long answer, but that's what we are doing.
No, I totally get it. It's such a vast space, and I really love that structured approach. It brings some clarity around this noisy space, But oftentimes projects do not go as planned, right? What are some of the red flags that you have learned to identify early in generative AI projects which signal trouble down the line? Because I imagine you must have seen some promising projects lose steam, right?
Yeah.
What do you think are some early signs that teams should be looking out for?
Yeah. So a framework which I think, or a mental model which I think is really powerful, is that within Amazon we talk about one-way door decisions and two-way door decisions. So two-way door decisions is you've got an idea, and you can just go and test out that idea. Go build a prototype, and if it doesn't work, you just move on to the next idea. There are also these one-way door decisions. These are the kind of things that involve, you need to make a big capital investment. Once you've gone down that path, you don't really recoup your funding. So I think within organizations, you want to encourage the two-way door kind of, the experimentation. So that's one thing that needs to be done. I think, so a lot of organizations, instead of doing two-way doors, they put everything as one-way door patterns. And I think you constrain innovation. For the cases where there's kind of a one-way door decisions, I think you want to find the balance in how quickly you make that decision. Sometimes having 70% of the information is enough to move forward. If you can make a decision in 3 months instead of 12 months, do that. I think you want to find that balance. I think there are also some patterns that for these projects to look at some of the riskiest assumptions. Do you have access to the right data? Go test those kind of things early on. Is the model, if you give the right information to the model, is it going to give you the desired output? Those kind of things can be tested early on instead of waiting 6 months down the line. I think there is also things like risk management. Is it a risky use case? Those kind of considerations need to be identified very early on in the cycle. So I think those are, some of the things I would say as guidance in terms of red flags.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's such a useful lens, especially for early age teams. Now I want to zoom out a little bit and focus on your experience. You've worked in so many industries, right? Like finance, retail, telecom, and more. With that experience of cross-sector lens, how do you see AI adoption vary across different industries? Are some of them more risk tolerant or, mainly towards innovation ready than others? Is that what you've noticed?
So we do see a large variation between industries, and then even within industries, there's a variation. Now, I look at a lot of data, doing a lot of analysis across industries, and I've come up with a kind of a framework. So when you look at industries, you can classify them as primary industries, things like agriculture and mining, secondary, things like manufacturing, and then tertiary industries are like services and include things like retail, banking, and so on. I think there is a sense that the more you go to the right-hand side towards the services industry, there's a stronger digital intensity. It's much easier to go and drive a technology project and have quick returns than something that deals with the physical world where you've built, physical infrastructure to do things. So overall, we are seeing a lot more faster adoption on those tertiary industries and the secondary industries than primary industries. That's not to say it does not happen. I think another dimension I would throw in is whether the company is B2C, business to consumer, or B2B. So some of the strongest use cases we see today are in things like customer operations, customer support, contact center. And the imperative is really strong with B2C. They want to have, if there's customers calling to a contact center needing help, you want to help them very, very quickly. First of all, there's a cost associated with that. But secondly, customer success satisfaction has a direct correlation with the bottom line. So I think those are the dimensions. So I would say overall where I see the fastest traction are the tertiary industries, B2C, you'll see the banks, financial services doing a lot of that. Software company, ISV companies, they are infusing generative AI in their services. I'm not in where I am, I'm not dealing with healthcare and education, but I believe those ones are in some other areas where we are having some.
Yeah, I
some
think
traction.
you definitely touched base on something very important, right? Especially the industries which are adopting AI very frequently and very vastly in their business operations. But I want to follow up on that. What are some industries you feel that are under leveraging generative AI, and why do you think so?
Yeah. So I think I had heard a comment a while back. They said, the future is already here, but it's not evenly distributed. And I think if you can go into any industry and you'll find those early adopters that are driving innovation, and then you'll get the early majority, late majority, and the laggards. I would argue, apart from what I mentioned around the primary, secondary, and tertiary industry, that variation within the industries are the biggest. That being said, I think the secondary sectors and the primary and secondary sectors are about maybe 2 years behind what we are seeing with areas like financial services or like the software companies. They're catching up, but I think that's a broad kind of analysis that I would make.
Yeah, that's definitely a surprising pick. I want to segue into a completely new topic, which is your area of expertise, right? Cloud infrastructure.
Yeah.
How do you see cloud infrastructure evolving to support emerging technologies like generative AI and machine learning?
Yeah, so when I made my switch from chemical engineering towards technology, at that time you would actually have physical data centers, and I had this one project where we had to get a server to launch a project. It took 6 months, because you had to actually order a server, physical server, you get it into the data center, it needs to be powered up, needs to be racked, connected, all of that, before you can actually spin up a service. I think cloud is this massive enabler that you can actually, if you have an idea, you can actually implement that immediately. You're also no longer constrained with the old bounds that you need to have a server, you need to install your software, you need to run that, you need to maintain that. There's a lot of kind of the higher level services. If you've got a generative AI problem that you want to solve, you can actually just choose a very specific service that's aligned with those use cases. So I see this as a massive accelerator. In the case of generative AI, you'll find that all of these large language models, foundation models, they're available in cloud environments. You can essentially just choose your model and start using it and pay per token. So there's these kind of cost advantages. It just simplifies a lot of things.
Yeah, absolutely, that makes sense. And cloud is a backbone of innovation, right? But what about small businesses? For small businesses just getting started, what's your advice for building a cloud strategy that's scalable but also cost effective? We oftentimes have this perception that cloud is just for large enterprise clients, right? But SMBs are starting to punch above their weights here too.
Yeah.
What should they be really knowing here?
Yeah, in fact, I would say some of the fastest adopters of cloud have been smaller businesses. We talk about digital native businesses, many of them who were kind of born in the cloud. That was the very first thing that they did. But I would say for organizations getting started, you want to set up certain foundations around security and governance and control. You may have 2 people accessing the cloud today, but it may be 100 people in a year or 2 years from now. So all of those kind of controls you want to get in place as early on as possible. And it's actually not that difficult. So there are these kind of, within AWS, for example, there's the landing zones and control tower. You just go and utilize those kind of foundational capabilities from the start, and then you actually start using the services on top of that. I would say also the other thing is to start with a modern cloud native architecture. It's so much easier to build solutions and applications and products by stitching together some of these cloud native services without you needing to really manage infrastructure. You know, your pace of acceleration is just so much faster.
Yeah, it's really empowering to see SMBs, starting to pick up, and I think the way they have been leveraging cloud technology as well, right? Daniel, I'm curious to know, how can organizations, either small or big, structure their strategy around generative AI?
Yeah, so this question has come up a lot of cases when I speak to customers. They've heard around generative AI, they hear about successes that other companies are having, and their questions like, how do you actually get started, and what's that overall strategy that they should follow? Now, within AWS, we published what's called a cloud adoption framework, and this white paper has been around for a few years. But there has been a newer kind of edition version done specifically for AI. In a nutshell, when customers ask us, how to get started, the key thing is to start that initial kind of generative AI or AI working group, where you bring different functions in your organization together. So it would be technology, it would be the business side, it would be functions like HR, finance, perhaps. And they would be tasked to, first of all, establish an intake process. A lot of these organizations, ideas come up, employees or teams, they identify an opportunity and that they can solve. To have an intake process where they can bring in their ideas, and then have an evaluation framework, where you can actually go and estimate the ROI or the payback period. Build out a roadmap that say, okay, maybe this specific project we won't be able to do in 2025, but it's a 2026 item. The same working group should also be looking at things like governance and risk management. Now, that varies a lot between industries. So financial services or healthcare would have much stricter requirements than others. But, you want to establish what those policies are in the organization. There are also things that they need to enable, or things like data foundations. A lot of AI projects struggle with not having the right foundations, and when you're executing an individual project, you can't really solve the larger organizational issues. So you want to have things like the data strategy aligned with that. So this team would be looking at things like data strategy, data foundations. They would also look at organization enablement. A lot of employees want to actually get deeper with generative AI. They want to learn a lot more, provide those kind of learning pathways. And then I would say this working group should just overall look at what are the acceleration challenges. You want to get things also, some patterns built, architectural patterns built on really early on, so that when future projects come, you can reuse capabilities that have been built elsewhere. Another big opportunity is within AWS Amazon. We actually have our internal tools. We have a tool called Cedric. It's like our internal chat interface, AI interface. I can actually go and, when I solve a specific problem, create a persona. I give it context, the data, and I can actually share that with my team or other people. So you actually want to look at how can you actually democratize these learnings. If someone has built something in their area, how can they scale that out? I think those are some of the key things that organizations should look if they want to drive scale. So in the end, also I think we, in the fullness of time, we expect that AI and generative AI will infuse all parts in organizations across all industries. And what we want to do is we want to get there in the fastest possible way.
Yeah, those are some great insights. As they say that great things cannot happen in silo. You can only create great business outcomes only when you work along with so many teams and see where the operational gaps are and what AI initiatives can actually fill those gaps, right?
Yeah,
Thanks for sharing
absolutely.
that. And now I want to link back to business outcomes. You've worked on mapping business, you worked on mapping value streams.
Yeah.
How do you help tie back AI initiatives back to business outcomes?
Yeah, so I think there is some variation in value streams. So what I do in value streams is probably different from what other practitioners do. But my approach is I want to be able to look at any industry or any arbitrary company. I want to determine very quickly what's the most high value use cases, what has and build that directional use case. Now, in order to do that, I mentioned briefly I use some industry data sets like labor market statistics. There's the North America industry classification system. There's also the areas that you can actually go from, those industries to job categories and, the AI augmentation. So I use AI a lot for these kind of analysis where I would actually change, do some configurations, and I would kick off the AI job to run for 24 hours. It generates all these insights to me. But the mental model is you start with the industry or the company. You ask, what are the key strategic objectives, key success factors that's most important in that industry. You ask, and I'm asking that to the model. And you would ask, what are some of the value streams or customer journeys that would actually enable those key success factors. And you can actually look at these large language models today. They actually generate really, really good results. So you can get this list of a dozen or so value streams. And then based on that, you can actually start asking questions. You intersperse some additional data for that industry, the labor market information. You start asking about business capabilities, use cases. And I use that kind of a modeling. And then the outcome of that is you can get a report that says, for this industry, this company, this is the core areas to focus on.
That connection is everything. Otherwise, tech is just tech's sake, right?
Yeah.
Now let's pivot into a bigger theme, right? Let's talk about jobs, maybe for our listeners. How do you see AI augmenting versus automating human work? Like, where's the balance exactly?
Yeah. So I want to maybe just start with there is this research that was done. You can do a web search, the AI Occupational Exposure Index. Now, what these researchers have done is they looked at human abilities and they actually identified 52 different skills. Like, fine motor skills is maybe one. Being able to understand oral conversations is one. Physical strength, endurance, and all of that, mathematical skills. And I've actually looked at job categories and I mapped them to these skills. And I also looked at AI capabilities. So you can actually build a view that would say, certain occupations, to what extent will AI either augment or do a replacement. Now there's a second layer that you can build on that. And there was a really good research paper from researchers at Statistics Canada last year. So we have then, established that certain job functions can be augmented with AI. But the question is it a replacement of those tasks, or is it where AI is augmenting humans? And the mental model with that is that if the task can be, with all the context, can be provided to an AI system, and if it can execute end to end, within that environment, there's enough feedback processes where it can actually check the results, iterate through that task could probably be automated in its entirety. But areas where if you do need human feedback, humans bring knowledge of the world around them, they need to kind of augment or supervise that's more of an augmentation area. So that research paper, you can also do a web search on that, has actually looked at some of these job categories and classified them, or they have like a scale for augmentation and automation. I'll give you one example that I think is a really good example of automation for software testing, where you actually have to generate, the unit test cases. You can actually have a system go and execute on those cases, pass, fail. those kind of cases where you would say it leans heavily towards automation, and maybe a human just reviews the results afterwards. But if you go to your doctor, for some issue, you want to have the doctor in the loop, because they can ask you more questions. They can actually review the insights from the AI system.
Yeah, I definitely think the balance is key, right? And it's changing so fast. I think this naturally leads me to my next question. When we speak about individual contributors or professionals, how can they better prepare themselves for an AI powered world? We often talk about reskilling, right? But in practical terms, what should they be really focusing on?
Yeah, so I think I've seen this comment a few times. They said that people should not be as worried about AI taking their jobs, but maybe other humans who use AI that would be, taking their jobs. I think there is the idea that, if you use AI every single day, try to apply it, you can actually use that, and be more productive in your work, drive bigger impact. I think that is a key area. I think the other area that I find, and I'm not sure if this will hold, is that I find that the biggest value that we can bring is by connecting the dots. The AI system will be able to perform that task much better than I can, much quickly than I can. But we bring experience of the world around us. We can actually connect the dots between those areas. So I think a lot of cases, I think depth will still matter. I use AI as a coding companion, but I can use it because I understand the coding world. So you still need to have that depth, but I think also to be able to connect the dots between areas, I think that's going to be a critical area, and constant learning, just using AI.
Absolutely. I think that's great advice. I think it all boils down to just curiosity and adaptability, doesn't it? And, Daniel, if you had one advice, if you had to give to a technologist or a business leader who's navigating through AI right now, what would that be?
So you hit on curiosity, all of that. But I think maybe if I was to give one point of advice, there had been things that evolved in the world we are just because of constraints that existed in the past. Challenges and problems we never solved. I think we have a big opportunity to go back to those business processes, those things that have not been solved, the same way of doing things the last 50 or 100 years. Look at it in fresh eyes. I think we sometimes make a mistake in thinking, well, this thing surely someone else has already looked at. Surely someone else has already looked at, maybe found that it's not feasible. And you'll be surprised how many areas, when you look into it, you investigate, there's this big opportunity. So I would say identify those unsolved problems and, work to solve them.
Yeah, that's another great advice again. So before we wrap up, any book, podcast, or any article that you would like to suggest to our listeners, which really inspired you, or you think that more people should be exploring?
So a book which I read, I think it was maybe 2 years back, it's called Rewired. It was written by consultants from McKinsey. It's a little bit of a dry kind of stuff if you think about it, but a lot of the kind of things that we talked about today around doing that transformation, identify where the use cases, where the opportunities are, connecting that with technology, perhaps cloud technology and data. What's the value of data? I think that they have a really good framework in that book. So that has really shaped my thinking. So that would be my recommendation.
Daniel, it's been an absolute pleasure. On behalf of the Business Technology Club, I want to sincerely thank you for taking the time to come here and share your insights. We touch base on so many areas, and we really hope that our listeners are able to walk away with some great takeaways. So until next time, thank you for tuning into Grey Matter and Code.